Okay, can you start by telling us your full name and occupation, please?
Okay, so I am Kay Bacchus-Baptiste, and I'm an attorney at law
And where do you reside?
at Harmony Hall Prospect.
And where were you born?
I was born in Richland Park, St. Vincent's the Grenadines. Of course, you know that is a an Indian area. So I was born in Richland Park to my parents, Jemima Bacchus and Crichton Bacchus.
Okay, and mind shedding some light on their occupations?
My father is now deceased. He was an insurance manager of the first local manager for British American Insurance Company. And my mother was the confidential secretary for Geest. She is still alive, thank God. She's 92, but she resides outside St. Vincent.
And what about your siblings, your brothers and sisters?
Well, I am the first of seven.
Hmm.
The next one, Hyacinth, she lives in Antigua. Dawn, she lives in Florida. My brother Gregory, he was a bass musician. He's unfortunately deceased. And then there's Lennox, Alden, and Anthony.
Right, and
Hmm.
mind telling us about some of their occupations as well?
My sister Hai, she's a designer, a fashion designer, and Dawn is also a fashion designer. She has her own store. She designs her own clothes. My sister gives advice for decorating and so forth. My brother, as I said, he's a musician, and Tony is a businessman. There are two brothers who are relatively unemployed, but they're not so well. So that's the issue with them. Yeah.
Okay, any children if so?
I have one son. He's Kamal, and he's a businessman.
Okay. What about your relatives, specifically your uncles and aunts? Do you have a...
On my father's side, because the Bacchus came from my father,
Right.
and on his side, I had my aunt Anella, which I also carry her name. Who's one of my third name is Anella. She was married to Richard. She's now deceased. And then there was Gertie. She's in England. And Hubert Bacchus. He is in New York, somewhere in the States. And Massan was in Trinidad. All Bacchuses, yeah.
Okay. Do you know about your grandparents?
Yes, but they passed when, especially my grandfather, who was Albert Bacchus, he passed when I was relatively young. But I have memories of going to the home in Richland Park and visiting my grandmother and grandfather. He passed before her,
Mm.
and then she passed also. That was Gladys Bacchus. Yeah.
Okay. And you remember the full names?
No, Albert. I just know Albert Bacchus.
Albert.
I don't know what her maid. I think she was a Brown. My grandmother,
Mm.
Gladys Brown, related to Chippy Brown and that line,
Mhm.
and of course she married Bacchus. Yeah,
Okay, and do you know if they were farmers? What were their main?
mainly farmers.
Mainly
They
farmers.
had land at Richland Park,
Mm.
and that's where their home was. So mainly farmers. Yes,
Okay, and that's generally an assumption when you're from that region.
that's
So.
right. That's right. That's the valley.
And they lived in Richland Park,
They
correct?
lived in Richland Park. Yeah.
What
Mhm.
about the other relatives? Do you know of any of the others of Indian
Um,
descent?
the one who was in Trinidad, Masson, I think he was a businessman. Yeah. Gertie, I think she's now passed too. I'm trying to remember. There were more brothers, but I really can't remember some of the names. Huh? Anella was mainly a housekeeper, housewife, married, and her husband was a businessman.
Okay, and growing up, did you ever hear, maybe the grandparents or relatives talking about India or things that they heard about India?
Um, my father was very Indian centric. I mean, he would refer to his relatives and his heritage quite a bit, I must say. And so he was the main influence. He was really proud of his Indian heritage, yeah, my old man. And I think I was told, well, I did some research to find out what was the name, because what I was told is that Bacchus was not the name that they came to the
No.
island with. They had other names, another name, and then that was somehow given to them. So they adopted, and there are lots of Bacchuses, as you know. Junior and Denzel Bacchus, I'm related to them, one family. I think from my research they say that the Indian name might have been Rambulak Singh.
Rambulak Singh, the father of many of the surnames that we have.
Right. So that might
Yeah.
have been. I'm not 100% sure, but that is what my research told me.
Connected to the Bullocks as well, and
Right.
all of those surnames came from.
Yes. Yes.
Now, did you ever hear any mention about Indian names? You know, from your father's side, maybe the references to
No.
relatives who had Indian names.
No. No. Mm-mm.
Okay. And when your foreparents, you said your father told you about that side of the family. Do you have an idea as to where they settled when they came? Was it straight to Richland Park? Or?
I only know of Richland Park, and they had quite a bit of land in Richland Park. So I believe, and it was passed on. So I believe that he inherited. Albert, my grandfather, inherited the land from his parents, whatever. And yeah.
Okay. What do you remember about life in earlier times? You know, growing up in Richland Park and
No, I didn't
experiences.
live in
You
Richland
didn't
Park,
live-
even though I
okay.
was born there, because I lived there for a short while, from what I'm told.
Mm.
At about age 2, we moved to Chapman's.
Ah,
That's where my second sister Hyacinth was born, and we lived maybe a couple more years or 2 or 3 in Richland Park, in Chapman's, and then we moved to Kingstown. In Kingstown, so I'm like a Kingstown girl. Grew up, different places in Kingstown. Um, what I remember, I have memories of visiting my grandparents' home, a very humble home. I can remember the steps, the wall steps we had to walk up. I can remember the it was a wooden house, and there was a lot of land in the back that had bananas and stuff in it, even though that was not exactly where the farm was, but around the house. I can remember that. I can remember going into the yard, and part of it was paved and part was mud. How these
yes,
houses,
yes.
I can still remember that house was on stilts because you had to go up steps. And I can remember almost the smell of the mud. And I can remember my grandmother cooking in a big iron pot on an open fire. I can still taste the special taste of the flavor of the food from an iron pot.
From the outdoor cooking.
Yeah, the outdoor cooking. So I definitely have those memories of Richmond Park. Mhm.
All right. And what would you say about life and how different it is now compared to
Hmm.
growing up in Chapman's?
Um, I think there was more love, families were closer. When I was growing up, there was always a time set aside to go and visit family. And we would drive from Kingston. The old man would pack all of us in the car because I said there was 7 of us. But as I got siblings, it increased, and he'd pack all of us in the car, and we'd drive to Richmond Park and spend time out there with my grandmother and grandfather. Mainly grandmother, as I said, my grandfather passed when I was still pretty young. So I remember that. I think there was more love. I think there was more sharing and all of that. So
Okay. What about some of the cherished memories, things you'd always remember from growing up and from interacting with family, etc.?
well, I think that's what I told you. The visiting
The
and
visits.
sharing, the smell of the food in the iron pot. They don't cook like
Right.
that anymore in these big iron pots. I can remember also the smell of bread baking in an outdoor oven. It's quite different, and the taste is different also. I can remember that also. Maybe I just remember food.
Well, there may have been times when things wasn't as pleasant as
Mhm.
you have your treasured memories, but you also have memories that when things were difficult. Do you have any
Mhm.
such recollections?
Um, my grandfather, I know, had a drinking problem, so I know there was some difficulties when he drank, and I would hear my grandmother complaining. I can imagine what it would be like when you drink, and there was some, family struggles and what have you. But they stayed together. They stayed together until he died. So I do remember um, the difficulties and how I felt with the arguments, and which was attributed mainly to drinking. Yeah.
And if you had to change anything about your life, what would that be and why?
That's a difficult question.
It's like a pageant question.
Yeah, it's a pageant question. But when I think back, I am quite happy. I don't know that off the cuff I can say anything I would change as such. I I remember. I think I always wanted to be a lawyer, so I didn't change with that. That I did, and I've been in the profession now for many many years.
How many
I
years, if
oh,
you mind?
oh dear, I don't know if you want to know. Over 27 years. About that. 27 years I've been in the profession. I went straight from school to university and then straight from there back to working. Yeah, so it's many years in the profession.
What do you know about the foundation and its function?
Well, through my cousin Junior and my good friend Hadaway, Luan,
Luan.
I know when you all plan your meetings and your, I know you had some dinners, etc. I know there have been exchanges of visits from India to St. Vincent, and I have attended about 2 or 3 of your celebration of arrival day
I know
in
you were
St.
at this,
Vincent. I
this
was at the
one
last
this year.
one this
Yeah.
year, yeah, and I've been to about 2 or so before, so I know about those things, and I commend Junior and also Luan. They're very active, yeah.
In terms of anything you'd like to see the organization do in terms of the SVG Indian Heritage Foundation, furthering the connection, family
Yeah.
connections.
I've been to India in 2016 November. It was a great trip, and what I remember is that when the most of the Indians that we met there, when they heard we were from St. Vincent, there was an immediate love. Cricket. Cricket is
West
very
Indies.
influential in India. Yes, they immediately said, and they just came around us knowing that we were tourists and from the Caribbean and asked us about cricket. And also, some of them asked about my heritage, name Bacchus and stuff. They probably knew that. And again, there was this sort of embracing. I remember that distinctly, knowing that I had the Indian heritage. So, what I would like to see, more exchanges, not only cultural, but more visits. I might even go so far as saying that maybe this is ambitious, but if they can have some sort of citizenship of some sort for Vincentians who are of Indian heritage, um, if that can be done and I can do anything to encourage that, I think it would do a lot for our recognition and appreciation of our heritage. I am Afro Caribbean. I mean, my mother is of the African descent, and I feel connected to both sides. I feel connected to the African side, and to me, there is more of a link, it seems like, with knowing that you come from Africa than from India, the Indian side, and I think that needs to be improved. I must commend the organization, though. What you all have been doing has awoken that same feeling that I'm looking for. When I attended the last arrival of the Indian Day, I must say, even though you virtually do the same thing, the ship come aboard and you go and you register and you give names, but the speeches that link back and gave the history of the arrival of the Indians and where they settled and what they did and how they turned out, it made an impact.
And I too remember experiencing that same thing you mentioned with the connection when visiting India last year, and that
Okay.
it was a case that when you said St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you say, West Indies.
Yes.
And then they say Brian Lara.
Right,
So the name that
definitely.
brings you is Brian Lara, and the feedback you get is like Brian Lara.
Definitely.
So I know about that connection, and it's something that I realize that we share a common bond. At least if we don't have anything else in common.
Yes,
we
cricket
do have
man.
cricket as one of
Definitely.
those.
And it still exists, It still exists, that bond. Even though West Indies is not at the top of the game as they were then, it still exists.
All right. So did you enjoy sharing your story with us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.